Tom Reynolds had been dreaming about retirement for longer than he cared to admit. After 32 years of working as an electrical engineer, dealing with demanding clients and impossible deadlines, he was ready for something different. He wanted peace. He wanted quiet. And most importantly, he wanted a place where he could fish whenever he felt like it without driving an hour to get there. The search took almost 3 years. Every weekend, Tom would drive through the countryside looking at properties. Some were too small, others were too expensive. A few had nice land but terrible houses that would cost a fortune to fix. His wife had passed away 4 years earlier, and his kids were grown with families of their own in different states. Tom wanted something just for himself, a place where he could breathe. Then one Saturday morning in March, his real estate agent called with excitement in her voice. She'd found something special. An older gentleman named Mr. Peterson was selling his property because he was moving into assisted living. 15 acres with a 2-acre lake right in the middle of it. The price was reasonable because Mr. Peterson wanted someone who would love the land as much as he had. Tom drove out that same afternoon. The moment he turned onto the long gravel driveway, he felt something shift in his chest. Tall oak trees lined both sides of the road. Wildflowers were starting to bloom in the ditches. And then he saw it. The lake was beautiful. Crystal clear water reflecting the sky like a giant mirror. A simple wooden dock extended about 20 feet into the water, worn smooth by decades of use. The cabin itself was modest but well-maintained. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with windows overlooking the lake, and a screened porch that wrapped around the back. Mr. Peterson met him at the door, a thin man in his 80s with kind eyes and calloused hands. They walked the property together. Mr. Peterson showed him where the base liked to hide near the fallen log on the east side. He pointed out the best spot for catfish near the deeper water by the dock. He explained how he'd built the small fishing platform himself 20 years ago, using cedar wood that would last forever. The old man's voice cracked a little when he talked about the memories he'd made there. Before Tom left that day, he'd already decided. This was it. This was home. The paperwork took about 6 weeks to complete. During one of the meetings at the title company, Tom learned something he hadn't expected. The property had recently been annexed into something called the Willowbrook Heights HOA. Apparently, the neighborhood had been expanding, and the county had redrawn some boundary lines. Tom's property was now technically part of their district. His real estate agent waved it off. She said it was just a formality. The property had been there long before the HOA existed, so it was grandfathered in. Tom wouldn't have to follow most of their rules. Maybe he'd have to pay a small annual fee, but that was it. Nothing to worry about. At the closing, Tom met the HOA president, a woman named Helen who seemed pleasant enough. She was probably in her 60s, wore a floral blouse, and smiled warmly when she shook his hand. She welcomed him to the community and said they were thrilled to have him. She mentioned something about a neighborhood barbecue in the summer and handed him a folder with contact information. Tom thanked her and forgot about it almost immediately. Moving day was exhausting but exciting. Tom didn't have much furniture. After his wife died, he'd sold their house and most of their things, keeping only what mattered. Photographs, a few pieces of furniture with memories attached, his fishing gear, his books. That was about it. The first week in the new place felt like a dream. Tom woke up each morning to the sound of birds instead of traffic. He'd make coffee and sit on the porch watching the mist rise off the lake. The silence was incredible. No car horns, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. Just wind in the trees and water lapping against the dock. He spent his days working on the cabin. The place was structurally sound, but it needed some updates. Tom replaced the old fixtures in the bathroom. He repainted the kitchen cabinets. He fixed a loose board on the porch steps. The work felt good. Purposeful. Different from the abstract problems he'd solved at his job for 3 decades. By the end of the second week, Tom had settled into a routine. Morning coffee on the porch, a few hours of work around the property, lunch overlooking the lake. And then in the afternoon he'd grab his rod and tackle box and head down to the dock. The fishing was even better than Mr. Peterson had promised. Tom caught his first bass on a Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't huge, maybe 3 pounds, but it fought beautifully. He took a picture, released it back into the water, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pure joy, simple and uncomplicated. He explored every corner of his property. He found a small creek that fed into the lake from the north side. He discovered a clearing in the woods that would be perfect for a fire pit. He saw deer tracks near the southern fence line and turkey feathers scattered in a patch of tall grass. His nearest neighbor was about a quarter mile away through the trees. Tom met him once while checking the fence line, a retired teacher named Bob who'd lived there for 15 years. Bob seemed friendly enough. He mentioned that the neighborhood had changed a lot recently. New houses going up, more people moving in, the HOA getting more active. But he said it in a way that suggested Tom shouldn't worry about it. Tom didn't worry. He was too happy. This was exactly what he'd imagined retirement would be. He'd wake up when he wanted, fish when he wanted, work on projects that actually interested him. No meetings, no emails, no stress. He started stocking the lake with additional fish. He bought 50 small bass from a hatchery and released them carefully into different parts of the lake. He added some bluegill too because they'd provide food for the base and be fun to catch on light tackle. He even got a small canoe that he'd paddle around the lake in the evenings, just drifting and watching the sunset. By the time summer arrived, Tom had completely settled in. His skin was tan from being outside every day. His shoulders felt looser. He'd lost the tension he'd carried for years. He called his kids every week and told them how happy he was. They said he sounded different, lighter, more like himself. One morning in late June, Tom was sitting on his dock with his coffee, watching a heron stalk fish in the shallows. The water was perfectly still. The air smelled like honeysuckle. He thought to himself that this might be the most content he'd ever been in his entire life. He had no idea that everything was about to change. That afternoon, when he walked back to the cabin after a successful fishing session, he noticed something in his mailbox, a large envelope, certified mail. His name typed neatly on the front with an official-looking return address. Tom opened it standing right there by the mailbox. The letter inside was 3 pages long, printed on fancy letterhead. The Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee. As he read the first paragraph, his stomach started to sink. This wasn't a friendly welcome letter. This was something else entirely. Something that made his peaceful afternoon suddenly feel very different. He read it twice, not quite believing what he was seeing. His perfect retirement was about to become a lot more complicated. Tom read the letter again, slower this time, hoping he'd misunderstood something. He hadn't. The letter was from someone named Patricia Blackwell, who apparently now chaired something called the Architectural Review Committee. The language was formal and cold. It stated that all recreational fishing activities on community waterways required an annual permit. The cost was $500. Additionally, any fishing activities had to comply with newly established aesthetic guidelines, whatever that meant. Tom stood there holding the letter, completely confused. Community waterways? His lake wasn't a community waterway, it was on his property. He owned it. The deed was clear, the survey was clear. This had to be some kind of mistake. He walked back into the cabin and dug through his filing cabinet until he found his property documents. He spread them out on the kitchen table and went through everything carefully. The deed clearly showed the lake was within his property boundaries. The survey map showed the same thing. He even had documentation from the county confirming his water rights. Tom felt his initial confusion shift into irritation. This was obviously an error. Someone at the HOA had mixed up his property with something else. He'd just need to call them and straighten it out. The next morning, he called the number on the letterhead. A receptionist answered, her voice cheerful and professional. Tom explained the situation as calmly as he could. He'd received a letter about his lake, but there seemed to be a mistake because the lake was on his private property. The receptionist put him on hold. Elevator music played for almost 10 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed, less friendly. She said that all properties within HOA boundaries were subject to all regulations. There were no exceptions. If he had questions, He could submit them in writing to the committee. Tom asked to speak with Patricia Blackwell directly. The receptionist said Mrs. Blackwell was very busy and only took scheduled appointments. Would he like to schedule one? The earliest opening was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. Tom said no, thank you, and hung up. He decided to write a letter instead. He spent an hour crafting it, trying to keep his tone polite and professional. He explained that he'd purchased the property with full ownership of the lake. He included copies of his deed and survey. He respectfully requested that the matter be dropped and his property be recognized as exempt from this particular regulation. He mailed it certified mail so he'd know they received it. 2 weeks went by. Tom heard nothing. He kept fishing, though now there was a small knot of worry in his stomach that hadn't been there before. He tried to ignore it. This would get resolved. It had to. It was just bureaucratic confusion. Then another letter arrived. This one was even thicker than the first. Tom opened it at the kitchen table. His hands were shaking slightly, though he wasn't sure if it was from anger or anxiety. The HOA had not dropped the matter. Instead, they'd escalated it. The letter contained 3 separate violation notices, each with a reference number and a fine amount. Violation 1, unapproved dock structure. The wooden dock that Mr. Peterson had built 20 years ago was apparently not in compliance with current architectural standards. Fine, $800. Violation 2, unauthorized watercraft. His canoe, which he'd registered with the state and kept on his own property, was classified as an unapproved recreational vessel. Fine, $300. Violation 3, violation of community quiet hours. Someone had reported seeing him fishing at 6 in the morning, which was apparently outside the permitted recreation hours of 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Fine, $200. Tom sat there staring at the papers. $1,300 in fines for using his own property, for fishing in his own lake at whatever time he wanted, for owning a canoe. This couldn't be real. It felt like some kind of bizarre joke. He called the HOA office again. This time he wasn't calm. He told the receptionist that these violations were absurd and illegal. She repeated the same script about all properties being subject to all regulations. Tom asked again to speak with Patricia Blackwell. This time, the receptionist said Mrs. Blackwell was in a meeting. Tom left his number and asked for a callback. No one called back. Over the next 3 weeks, Tom tried everything. He called repeatedly and left messages. He sent emails. He even drove to the HOA office, which turned out to be a small suite in a strip mall, but the door was locked with a sign saying, "Visits were by appointment only." He refused to pay the fines. This was his property. He wasn't going to pay money for permission to use something he owned. Then the letters started coming more frequently. A notice that his unpaid fines were accruing late fees, another violation for failure to remove the unapproved dock, a warning that continued non-compliance could result in legal action. Tom's peaceful retirement had turned into a constant source of stress. Every time he walked to the mailbox, his chest tightened. Every time he went fishing, he found himself looking over his shoulder, wondering if someone was watching him. Someone was obviously reporting him. But who? He rarely saw anyone. His nearest neighbor, Bob, hadn't mentioned anything. He tried talking to Bob about it. The older man's face grew serious when Tom explained what was happening. Bob shook his head slowly. He said the HOA had changed a lot in the past year. New board members. New rules. They'd started cracking down on all kinds of things. Bob himself had gotten a violation for painting his mailbox the wrong color. Tom asked if this Patricia Blackwell had always been this aggressive. Bob's expression darkened. He said Patricia had taken over the committee about 8 months ago. Since then, everything had gotten worse. She seemed to have it out for anyone with larger properties. Bob suggested Tom might want to talk to a lawyer. A lawyer. Tom didn't want to spend his retirement fighting legal battles. He just wanted to fish, but the letters kept coming. The fines kept accumulating. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, his phone rang. Unknown number. Tom almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. It was a voicemail from Patricia Blackwell herself. Her voice was sharp and formal. She stated that Tom had been given numerous opportunities to comply with community standards. His continued refusal was unacceptable. If he did not respond within 48 hours to schedule a compliance meeting, the HOA would have no choice but to involve the authorities. The authorities. Tom played the message 3 times. She was threatening to call the police on him for fishing in his own lake. He couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. What would the police even do? This was a property dispute. A civil matter. They couldn't arrest him for using his own land, could they? Tom didn't sleep well that night. He kept thinking about that message. The cold certainty in Patricia's voice. She wasn't bluffing. She actually intended to call the authorities. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to call her bluff. What was the worst that could happen? But another part of him, the part that had spent 32 years following rules and avoiding conflict, felt genuinely worried. He'd never been in trouble with the law in his life, never even gotten a speeding ticket. The idea of police showing up at his house made him feel sick. The next morning, Tom woke up determined to go fishing anyway. He'd lived his whole life doing what he was supposed to do, following the rules, being responsible, and where had it gotten him? Here he was, finally retired, finally doing something that made him happy, and some HOA busybody was trying to take it away. He made his coffee. He grabbed his tackle box. He walked down to the dock just as the sun was starting to come up. The water was calm and beautiful. A light mist floated across the surface. Tom cast his line and felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. This was his place. His property, his lake. No one had the right to tell him he couldn't be here. He'd been fishing for maybe 20 minutes when he heard vehicles coming up the driveway. More than one. Tom turned around, his heart starting to pound. 2 sheriff's department cars pulled up near the cabin. Tom watched as 4 people got out. 2 deputies in uniform, and 2 other people. One of them was a woman in her 50s wearing expensive-looking clothes and carrying a folder. Tom had never met Patricia Blackwell in person, but somehow he knew exactly who she was. He set down his fishing rod and started walking back toward the cabin. His legs felt shaky. This was really happening. She'd actually called the police. As he got closer, he could see the deputies looked uncomfortable. The younger one was holding a notebook. The older one had his thumbs hooked in his belt, his face neutral. Patricia stepped forward, her expression cold and satisfied. She said something to the deputies, then looked directly at Tom. Whatever happened next, Tom's quiet retirement was officially over. Tom's heart was hammering in his chest as he walked toward the group standing near his cabin. He'd never been in trouble with the law. Never had police show up at his home. The whole situation felt surreal, like he was watching it happen to someone else. The older deputy stepped forward first. He was probably in his 50s, with gray hair at his temples and the weathered look of someone who'd been doing this job for a long time. His name tag read Morrison. "Are you Tom Reynolds?" the deputy asked. His tone was professional but not unfriendly. Tom nodded, not trusting his voice at first. "Yes, sir. That's me." Patricia stepped forward before the deputy could continue. She was holding a folder stuffed with papers and her expression was triumphant. "Officers, this is the man I told you about. He's been trespassing on community property and engaging in illegal fishing activities despite repeated warnings." Tom felt anger flash through him, cutting through the anxiety. "Illegal fishing? This is my property. My lake." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "This lake falls within HOA boundaries and is designated as community space according to our revised covenants. You are in violation of multiple regulations and have ignored all attempts at resolution." The younger deputy, whose name tag said Chen, pulled out a small notepad. He looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't quite sure why they were there. "Ma'am, you reported trespassing and illegal activity. Can you explain exactly what laws are being broken?" Patricia launched into an explanation about HOA regulations, covenants, and community standards. She pulled out papers from her folder, showing them maps and documents. Tom tried to follow what she was saying, but it was all twisted around. She was making it sound like the HOA owned the lake, like Tom was some troublemaker who'd been causing problems for months. Deputy Morrison held up his hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, I need to understand something. Does the HOA own this lake?" Patricia hesitated for just a second. "The lake is within our boundaries and subject to our authority." "That's not what I asked." Morrison's voice was patient, but firm. "Does the HOA hold the deed to this property?" "The boundaries were properly—" "Ma'am, please answer the question. Who owns this land?" Tom saw his opening. "I do. I have the deed in the house, and the property survey. The lake is entirely on my land. I bought it 3 months ago. The younger deputy Chen looked relieved. Can we see those documents, Mr. Reynolds? Tom hurried into the cabin, his hands shaking as he pulled out his filing cabinet. He grabbed the deed, the survey, and his water rights documentation. When he came back outside, Patricia was arguing with Morrison about HOA authority and legal jurisdiction. Chen took the documents from Tom and studied them carefully. He pulled out his phone and seemed to be looking something up. After a minute, he showed his phone screen to Morrison. The older deputy looked at it, then at the papers, then at Patricia. Ma'am, according to these documents, Mr. Reynolds owns this property. The deed is clear. The lake is on his land. Patricia's face was turning red. The HOA boundaries supersede individual property claims when it comes to community resources. We have legal authority. Morrison shook his head. That's not how property law works. This is a civil matter between you and Mr. Reynolds. It's not criminal trespassing. There's no illegal activity here. We can't arrest someone for using their own property. But he's violating our covenants. Patricia's voice had gone up an octave. That's legally binding. HOA covenant disputes are civil issues, Morrison said. His voice had taken on a tired quality, like he'd had this conversation before. You need to resolve this through the courts or through mediation. We can't enforce HOA rules, that's not what we do. Chen handed the documents back to Tom. Sorry about this, Mr. Reynolds. Sounds like you've got a property dispute on your hands, but that's between you and the HOA. Tom felt a wave of relief wash over him. They weren't going to arrest him. They understood this was ridiculous. Patricia's face had gone from red to almost purple. This is unacceptable. He has been repeatedly warned. He's accumulated thousands of dollars in fines. He's in contempt of community standards. Morrison turned to face her fully. Ma'am, I'm going to say this one more time. This is not a police matter. If you believe Mr. Reynolds is violating HOA rules, you need to take it up in civil court. Calling 911 for HOA disputes is not appropriate, and it wastes resources that could be used for actual emergencies. The other HOA board member who'd come with Patricia, a thin man in his 40s, looked like he wanted to disappear. He'd been quiet the whole time, standing off to the side. Patricia opened her mouth to argue again, but Morrison cut her off. We're done here. Have a good day, Mr. Reynolds. The two deputies walked back to their cars. Chen gave Tom a small nod, almost apologetic. Their vehicles pulled away, leaving Tom standing there with Patricia and the other board member. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Tom could hear birds singing in the trees. The morning sun was warm on his face. His fishing rod was still sitting on the dock where he'd left it. Patricia's eyes were cold as she looked at him. You think this is over? It's not. Not even close. This is my property, Tom said quietly. I own this land, I own this lake. You have no right to tell me I can't fish here. We have every right to enforce community standards. You agreed to HOA jurisdiction when you purchased this property. I never agreed to anything, and even if I did, you can't just claim my lake as community property. Patricia stepped closer, her voice dropping. You have no idea who you're dealing with. We have resources, we have lawyers. You're just one person. One stubborn old man who doesn't understand how things work. The other board member touched her arm. Patricia, maybe we should... She shook him off. No, Mr. Reynolds needs to understand his situation. She looked back at Tom. You have 2 weeks to comply with all outstanding violations and pay your fines. If you don't, we're filing for an injunction. We'll freeze your access to that lake while the courts sort this out. And trust me, we have very good lawyers. This could take years. Tom felt his stomach drop. Years. He'd spent his life savings on this property. He didn't have money for a years-long legal battle. Patricia must have seen something in his face because she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Think about it, Mr. Reynolds. 2 weeks. Pay the fines, get the permits, follow the rules, or lose everything. She turned and walked back to her car, the other board member following. Tom watched them drive away, dust rising from the gravel driveway. He stood there for a long time after they left. His coffee had gone cold. His fishing rod sat abandoned on the dock. The peaceful morning he'd started with felt like it had happened days ago instead of just an hour ago. Tom walked slowly back into the cabin. He sat down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. Patricia was threatening to take away his access to his own property. She could tie him up in court for years, drain whatever money he had left. He thought about just giving in, paying the fines, getting their stupid permits, following their rules. It would be easier, less stressful. He could just fish during their approved hours and pretend the lake wasn't really his. But something in him rebelled at that thought. He'd worked his entire life, played by the rules, done everything right. He'd earned this retirement. He'd earned the right to fish in his own lake whenever he wanted. And now some power-hungry HOA board member was trying to take it away because... Why? Because she could? Tom picked up his phone. His daughter answered on the third ring. He explained everything that had happened. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Dad, you need a lawyer. Like, yesterday. I don't have money for a big legal fight. You don't have a choice. She's not going to stop. People like that never stop. They get off on pushing people around." Tom knew she was right. He thought about Mr. Peterson, the old man who'd sold him the property. Peterson had lived there for decades without any problems. But that was before Patricia Blackwell and her new rules. "Okay," Tom said. "I'll find a lawyer." After he hung up, Tom sat there for a while longer. Then he stood up, walked back down to the dock and picked up his fishing rod. He cast his line into the water. The bass weren't biting anymore, but that wasn't the point. This was his lake, his property, his life, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away without a fight. 2 days later, Tom sat in a small office across from a lawyer named Ellen Rodriguez. She'd come highly recommended by his daughter's research. Ellen specialized in property law and had a reputation for taking on aggressive HOAs. She listened to his story, looked through his documents, and then leaned back in her chair. "They've overreached badly, but I need you to understand something. This is going to get worse before it gets better." Tom nodded. He'd already figured that out. "How much worse?" he asked. Ellen's expression was serious. "Much worse. But if you're willing to fight, I think we can win." Ellen wasn't kidding when she said things would get worse. 3 days after Tom hired her, the HOA filed their injunction. The legal document was 20 pages long and full of language Tom barely understood, but the main point was clear enough. They wanted a judge to prevent Tom from accessing the lake until the dispute was resolved. Tom couldn't fish, couldn't use his dock, couldn't even walk down to the water, on his own property, the property he'd bought with his retirement savings. Ellen filed a counter motion immediately. She also filed a lawsuit on Tom's behalf claiming harassment and requesting that the court formally recognize his property rights and exempt him from HOA authority. The legal fees started piling up. $5,000, then $10,000, then $15,000. Tom watched his savings account shrink and tried not to panic. He'd worked 32 years for that money. Now it was disappearing into a fight he'd never wanted. The worst part was the waiting. Legal processes moved slowly. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Tom still fished in his lake, but now every time he did, he wondered if someone was watching, documenting, building a case against him. Ellen kept him updated on everything. The HOA's lawyer was aggressive and well paid. They filed motion after motion, dragging out the process. Ellen said it was a common tactic. Make it expensive, make it exhausting, wait for the other side to give up. But Ellen was digging too. She requested all kinds of documents from the HOA through the discovery process. Meeting minutes, financial records, correspondence. The HOA fought every request, but the judge kept ordering them to comply. 4 months into the legal battle, Ellen called Tom with excitement in her voice. She'd found something interesting in the documents. Tom met her at her office that afternoon. Ellen had papers spread across her desk, sticky notes marking important sections. She looked like someone who'd just solved a puzzle. "Look at this," she said, pushing a document toward him. "These are the HOA meeting minutes from 6 months ago. See that date? That's 3 months after you bought your property." Tom looked at the document. It was full of formal language and procedural notes. "I don't understand what I'm looking at." Ellen pointed to a specific paragraph. "This is where they voted to rezone several properties within the HOA boundaries. They classified your lake as a community space. But look at the attendance list." Tom scanned the names. 7 board members present. A quorum, apparently. "Now look at this," Ellen said, pulling out another document. "This is the HOA bylaws. According to their own rules, any rezoning that affects private property requires a 2/3 vote of all homeowners in the district, not just the board, and they have to notify affected property owners at least 30 days in advance." Tom felt a spark of hope. "They didn't notify me. They didn't notify anyone. They just did it in a board meeting. 7 people decided your lake was community property. No vote, no notification, nothing. So it's not legal?" Ellen smiled. "It's not legal. They can't just declare private property to be communal space by amending their bylaws. That's not how property rights work. But there's more." She pulled out another set of documents. "I started looking into why they're so focused on your property specifically. You're not the only one with a large lot, but you seem to be getting the most attention. So I did some research on Patricia Blackwell." Tom leaned forward. "And her husband is a developer, Michael Blackwell. He owns Blackwell Properties LLC. And guess what? 6 months ago, his company purchased the land adjacent to your property. 40 acres on the eastern side. Tom knew that land. It had been empty for years. Just woods and overgrown fields," Ellen continued. "I pulled his development plans from the county. He's building luxury homes, 12 houses, each on 3-acre lots. And you know what the marketing materials say?" She turned her laptop around. Tom saw a glossy rendering of expensive houses surrounded by trees. The headline read, "Lakeside Estates, exclusive lake access for residents." Tom's stomach sank as he understood. "My lake, your lake. They can't legally take it from you. So they're trying to force you out, make your life miserable, bury you in legal fees. They're hoping you'll get tired of fighting and sell, and I'm guessing they've got a buyer ready to offer you pennies on the dollar." Tom sat back in his chair. The pieces were falling into place. The aggressive violations, the threats, the injunction. It wasn't about HOA rules or community standards. It was about money, about turning Tom's private lake into a selling point for expensive houses. "Can we prove this?" Tom asked. Ellen's smile widened. "We don't have to prove intent. We just have to prove they illegally rezoned your property without following their own procedures, and we can definitely prove that." For the first time in months, Tom felt like maybe he had a chance. The deposition happened 2 weeks later. Tom sat in a conference room with Ellen, while Patricia Blackwell's lawyer asked him questions. Patricia was there too, sitting with her arms crossed, her expression cold. The lawyer tried to make Tom look unreasonable. Didn't he understand the importance of community standards? Wasn't he being selfish by refusing to share lake access? Didn't he care about property values in the neighborhood? Ellen objected to most of the questions, but Tom answered the ones he was allowed to answer honestly. He'd bought property with a lake. He wanted to fish in peace. That was all. Then it was Ellen's turn. She deposed Patricia, and Tom watched as his lawyer methodically dismantled the HOA's case. "Mrs. Blackwell, when did the HOA board vote to rezone Mr. Reynolds' property?" Patricia's lawyer objected, but the mediator allowed the question. "I don't recall the exact date," Patricia said. Ellen slid a document across the table. "According to these meeting minutes, it was April 15th, 3 months after Mr. Reynolds purchased the property. Is that correct?" "If the minutes say so." "And how many homeowners in the district were notified of this vote?" Patricia shifted in her seat. "The board acted within its authority." "That's not what I asked. How many homeowners were notified?" "The board doesn't need to notify every homeowner of every decision." Ellen pulled out another document. "According to your own bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4, any rezoning affecting private property requires notification to affected parties at least 30 days prior to the vote." "Was Mr. Reynolds notified?" "Silence, Mrs. Blackwell. Was Mr. Reynolds notified? The rezoning was a procedural matter. So that's a no. What about the vote itself? Your bylaws require a 2/3 majority of all homeowners for property rezoning. How many homeowners voted? Patricia's face was red. The board voted, 7 board members. Out of how many total homeowners in the district? 243. So 7 people voted to declare Mr. Reynolds' private lake as community property. Without notifying him. Without following your own procedures. Ellen paused. Mrs. Blackwell, is your husband a real estate developer? Patricia's lawyer objected immediately. Irrelevant. I think it's very relevant, Ellen said calmly. Mrs. Blackwell's husband recently purchased land adjacent to Mr. Reynolds' property. He's planning a development marketed with lake access. The same lake this HOA is trying to claim as community property. The room erupted in objections and arguments, but Tom saw something in Patricia's eyes. She knew she'd been caught. The deposition ended badly for the HOA. Patricia's lawyer requested a recess. They needed to consult with their client. In the hallway outside, Ellen turned to Tom. They're going to want to settle. What does that mean? It means they know they're going to lose. They'll offer to drop everything if you agree not to countersue for your legal fees and damages. Tom thought about that. 4 months of stress, $30,000 in legal fees, his peaceful retirement destroyed. What if I don't want to settle? He asked. Ellen studied him. Then we go to court. We let a judge decide. But Tom, litigation is expensive and unpredictable. A settlement means this ends now. Tom looked out the window at the parking lot. He thought about his lake, his dock, the simple joy of fishing in the morning. How much more will it cost to go to court? Could be another $20,000. Maybe more. Tom had about $40,000 left in savings. Going to court would drain almost everything, but settling meant Patricia walked away. No consequences for what she'd done. Let's go to court, Tom said. Ellen nodded slowly. Okay, but I need you to be sure. This is going to be hard, I'm sure. 3 weeks later, Patricia's lawyer made a different offer. They'd drop the injunction and all fines. They'd formally recognize Tom's property rights, and they'd pay $15,000 toward his legal fees. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Ellen said it was a good offer. Better than they'd expected. Tom thought about it for 2 days. He thought about Mr. Peterson, who'd lived on that property for decades in peace. He thought about his wife, who'd always told him to pick his battles. And he thought about what would happen if other people in the neighborhood faced the same thing. Patricia was still on the board. She could do this to someone else. Tom called Ellen. No deal. We're going to court. Tom, I know. But this isn't just about me anymore. Someone needs to stop her. Ellen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, okay, let's stop her. The courtroom was smaller than Tom expected. He'd seen plenty of courtrooms on TV, grand spaces with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. This one was plain and functional, with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs. Tom sat next to Ellen at a table on the left side. Patricia and her lawyer sat at the table on the right. She hadn't looked at him once. Judge Margaret Whitfield entered and everyone stood. She was probably in her 60s, with short gray hair and glasses perched on her nose. Ellen had told Tom that Judge Whitfield had a reputation for being no-nonsense, especially when it came to property disputes. She didn't tolerate games or time wasting. The HOA's lawyer went first. His name was Daniel something, and he wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Tom's first car. He argued that HOAs had broad authority to regulate properties within their boundaries, that covenants were legally binding, that Mr. Reynolds had purchased his property knowing it was part of the HOA district. He made Tom sound unreasonable, a difficult neighbor who refused to follow simple rules that everyone else followed. He talked about community standards and property values and the importance of uniform regulations. Tom watched the judge. Her face gave nothing away. Then it was Ellen's turn. She stood up and approached the bench with a folder in her hand. Your Honor, this case isn't about HOA authority or community standards. It's about a fundamental question. Can a homeowners association declare private property to be communal space without following proper procedures or notifying the property owner? She laid out the timeline carefully. Tom purchased the property in January. The deed clearly showed he owned the lake. 3 months later, in April, the HOA board voted to rezone his property. They classified the lake as community space. They did this without notifying Tom, without notifying any homeowners, without following their own bylaws. Ellen pulled out the HOA's bylaws and read the relevant section aloud. Property rezoning required notification and a 2/3 vote of all homeowners. The board had done neither. This wasn't a legitimate rezoning, Ellen said. It was 7 people deciding they could take someone's property by changing their bylaws. That's not how property law works in this country. Judge Whitfield leaned forward. Counselor, are you saying the HOA attempted to seize private property? Not seize, Your Honor. But they attempted to assert control over private property through improper procedures. And I believe there's a reason why. Ellen brought up Patricia's husband and his development. The land next door. The marketing materials promising lake access. She was careful not to accuse anyone directly. But she laid out the facts and let them speak for themselves. The HOA's lawyer objected several times, but Judge Whitfield allowed Ellen to continue. When Ellen finished, she returned to her seat. Tom could feel his heart pounding. Everything came down to this. To what this judge decided in the next few minutes. Judge Whitfield took off her glasses and cleaned them slowly. Then she looked at the HOA's lawyer. Counselor, help me understand something. Your client's bylaws clearly state that property rezoning requires notification and a homeowner vote. Why didn't that happen? Daniel stood up. Your Honor, the board believed they were acting within their discretionary authority. That's not what I asked. Did they follow their own procedures or not? A pause. The notification requirement was deemed unnecessary in this instance. Deemed by whom? The board. Judge Whitfield put her glasses back on. So the board decided they didn't need to follow their own rules. And they didn't need to tell Mr. Reynolds they were declaring his lake to be community property. The lake falls within HOA boundaries. Judge Whitfield held up her hand. I've heard enough. Here's what troubles me, Counselor. You're asking this court to enforce HOA covenants that were allegedly violated, but your client violated their own procedures to create those covenants in the first place. You can't have it both ways. Tom felt a rush of hope. The judge got it. She understood. Furthermore, Judge Whitfield continued, I've reviewed the property documents. Mr. Reynolds has clear title to this land. He has water rights documented by the county. The idea that an HOA can simply declare private property to be communal space by amending their bylaws is, frankly, absurd. Patricia's face had gone pale. Her lawyer tried to interject, but Judge Whitfield wasn't finished. This appears to be a clear case of overreach. I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Reynolds. His property is exempt from HOA architectural control. The lake is unequivocally his private property. All fines are void and unenforceable. Tom felt Ellen's hand squeeze his arm. They'd won. Actually won, but Judge Whitfield wasn't done. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Reynolds' legal fees. He was forced to defend property rights that should never have been questioned. And I'm ordering the HOA to formally amend their bylaws to prevent similar violations against other homeowners. This needs to be done within 60 days, and the amended bylaws must be approved by this court. The gavel came down. The sound echoed in the small courtroom. Tom sat there, not quite believing it was over. 6 months of stress, sleepless nights, $30,000 in legal fees that he'd get back, and finally, he could just fish in peace. Patricia stood up abruptly and left the courtroom without a word. Her lawyer gathered his papers, his expression carefully neutral. Ellen turned to Tom with a huge smile. We did it. Tom couldn't speak. He just nodded, feeling emotion well up in his chest. Relief, exhaustion, gratitude. Outside the courthouse, Ellen shook his hand. Go home and go fishing. You've earned it. Tom drove back to his property in a daze. When he pulled up the gravel driveway and saw the lake sparkling in the afternoon sun, he felt something release in his chest. It was really over. He didn't go fishing that day. He was too tired. Instead, he sat on his porch with a beer and just looked at the water. His water, his lake, his property. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Tom started getting visitors. The first was his neighbor Bob, who showed up with a 6-pack and a handshake. Heard what happened in court. Good for you, man. Patricia had it coming. Then came others. People from the neighborhood Tom had never met. They'd heard about the court case. Some wanted to thank him. Others wanted to tell their own stories about the HOA. Violations for ridiculous things. Fines that made no sense. Rules that seemed designed to make life difficult. One woman in her 70s told Tom she'd gotten a violation for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. A young couple said they'd been fined for parking their car in their own driveway overnight. The stories went on and on. Tom learned that Patricia had made a lot of enemies. She'd been aggressive with everyone, not just him. But no one had fought back before. The legal fees were too scary. It was easier to just pay the fines and follow the rules even when the rules were stupid. But now people were angry. They'd seen that Patricia could be beaten, that the HOA wasn't all powerful. 3 weeks after the court ruling, Tom heard through Bob that there was going to be a special HOA meeting. A vote of no confidence in Patricia and several other board members. Tom didn't go to the meeting. It wasn't his fight anymore. But Bob filled him in later. The turnout had been massive. People who'd never attended an HOA meeting showed up angry and ready to vote. Patricia was removed from the board. So were 2 of her allies. New board members were elected, people who promised to be reasonable and follow the actual rules. Bob also mentioned that an audit had been ordered of HOA finances. Apparently, some board members had questions about where all the fine money had been going. Patricia's husband's development had received several HOA contracts over the past year. Landscaping, construction, consulting fees. It all looked suspicious. Tom felt a grim satisfaction hearing that. Justice, maybe, or at least consequences. A month after the court case, Tom was fishing from his dock when he saw someone walking down from the cabin. For a second, his stomach clenched. Then he recognized the man. It was the young deputy, Chen, from that morning when Patricia had called the police. Chen waved as he approached. "Mr. Reynolds? Sorry to bother you. I was in the area and wanted to stop by." Tom reeled in his line. "No bother. Everything okay?" Chen smiled. "Yeah, everything's fine. I just heard about the court case. Wanted to say congratulations, and to apologize for that morning. We shouldn't have been called out for something like that. You were just doing your job. Maybe, but it didn't sit right with me. Glad you fought it. Glad you won." They talked for a few minutes. Chen admitted he'd grown up fishing with his grandfather. He missed it. Tom found himself offering to let Chen come fish sometime if he wanted. Chen's face lit up. "Seriously? That'd be great." After Chen left, Tom cast his line back into the water. The afternoon sun was warm. A light breeze rippled the surface of the lake. Somewhere in the trees, a bird was singing. Tom caught a bass. Not huge, maybe 2 pounds, but it fought well. He took a picture, then released it back into the water. He watched it swim away, disappearing into the dark water. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter. "Proud of you, Dad." Tom smiled and put the phone away. He sat there on his dock, his fishing rod in his hands, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. Real peace. Not the anxious kind where he was waiting for the next letter or the next threat. Just peace. This was what he'd wanted all along. This moment. This simple, perfect moment. The sun started to set, painting the sky orange and pink. Tom stayed on the dock, fishing until it was too dark to see. Then he walked back to the cabin, made himself dinner, and sat on the porch listening to the night sounds. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, make coffee, come down to the dock as the sun came up. Fish for a few hours, maybe catch something, maybe not. It didn't really matter. This was his life now, his retirement, his lake, his peace, and nobody could take it away from him ever again.